Hey everyone, this is Andy Hall. You're watching The Best Advice Ever. This is the show where awesome people come on and talk about the best advice they ever heard. The guest, my guest, our guest tonight is Pat Green. Pat Green is a photographer in the Chicago area. He was on the last Late Show. The link is in the chat. And Pat, how you doing today? How you doing?
I'm great. I don't know what else to say. I'm great. It's been a day. There's capitalism. I did that. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's good. You know, someone from the chat says hello. Good morning, Pat. So I imagine that Douglas must be in a place. There must be someplace morning-ish where he is on the other side of the planet, perhaps.
Doug is in New Brunswick.
Oh, New Brunswick. All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
He's one of my Canadian friends.
Excellent. Well, you know, I think everyone who lives in the United States of America, excuse me, I want to be very specific here, is that everyone should have a Canadian friend just in case you have to run, right?
In 2016, I started talking to some friends after the election and said, so, things get bad. Can me and my kid crash at your place till this blows over?
Good. I think that's a realistic. I think that's realistic. I think that's a realistic thing to seek out.
In my case, it was somewhat serious because I had worst case scenarios going on in the back of my mind. I've always felt that Otto, meaning the father of Anne Frank, I think that Otto's family would have still been alive if he saw the signs and got out early. They stayed too long.
You know, I totally agree with you, and you know, I have to tell you, I'm still looking at the door. You know, I mean, Biden, he might just be a firewall. I mean, I don't want to sound negative. I don't want to bring the party down this early. I usually wait till later. But, you know, he might just be a firewall. I don't know.
It really all depends on what happens in the midterm elections. In the midterm elections, we're either back with Republican control of the House and the Supreme Court, or we get a larger share of the House and maybe can actually make progress. I doubt we'll see 2/3, but maybe we'll get more.
Hopefully. So Douglas says, I work the overnight shift, so I just got up a little while ago. Yeah. As a person who's worked third shift, I understand the churn of hours and days and that lifestyle.
Not the best advice I ever got, but when I started working third shift at the taxi company, my mom told me that I knew I was used to third shift when I wanted a cheeseburger at 6 a.m. And when that day hit, it was like, yep, I've crossed the line.
I think one of the sins, one of the secular sins of the Boston area is that we only have one real diner that's open 24/7, and that's the South Street Diner, right by South Station. Not down by Chinatown. That is the place where you could go 24 hours a day and get yourself a burger. So we were just talking about advice. Pat, you're on a show called The Best Advice Ever. What would be the best advice you ever heard?
I'm going to lead into it by saying this was a longer journey than I thought it would. Because as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about advice wrong. I've heard people that have had these huge moments that they live by, and I never really lived by them. You know, like my father, his advice to me was always, hey, if something goes wrong, say, that's great. Now let's figure out why. It was a nice attitude, but I don't always do that. You know, I over the years, I had a friend of mine when I got out of the hospital say, it's okay to not be okay. And God, that feels good, but it's not defining for me. And I decided, okay, since I can't have any definitive advice while I'm eating dinner, I'm going to write down a top 10 list and deliver it all David Letterman style.
Oh, but very interesting. I am intrigued. I am intrigued. I like this. I like it a lot.
Well, I didn't do it, so you know you're not going to get that opportunity. But
okay.
it was while I was writing down those things that I discovered that there is actually a moment. And it was repetitive advice from my grandfather.
Mm.
And the advice was, look into their eyes.
Wow.
And it started off when I was playing t-ball in Little League. I loved stealing bases. It was just something I loved doing. It was this adventurous rush of adrenaline, but I wasn't terribly good at it at first.
Right.
So my grandfather told me, look at the pitcher's eyes. That's how you're going to choose your moment. And so I did that. And then when I was learning how to play football and I wanted to get better at interceptions, he always told me, look at the receiver's eyes. When his eyes are about to widen, that's when he's about to catch the ball, and that's when you make your move. You don't look at the ball, you look at his eyes. It's like, oh, holy shit. And then when I was getting ready to get into my first fight sophomore year of high school against the bully, in our planning for that fight and him teaching me how to fight, he told me again, look into his eyes to know what his moves are going to be, to anticipate.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. And then whenever he was working on the car and I had the terrible, horrible, tension-filled job of holding the flashlight up, my Uncle Jeff, when I was living with my grandparents, was only 7 years older than me. So it was more like a big brother, little brother dynamic. And both of us were terrified to hold the old man's flashlight. Because if you didn't do it just right, he would, gosh, dear son of a, over there. So one time when he was getting angry and frustrated with me because I couldn't read his mind, he's like, look at my eyes. That's where you point the flashlight. Okay.
Interesting.
But I had my first serious relationship. And I was in high school. And we had our first serious argument. And I was the one who blew it. Now, I've always been good at one thing. I cop to my garbage. If I screw up, I have no problem owning it. But she was mad. I didn't know what to do. So I'm sitting there on the front stoop. I'm smoking. Hey, that's how we rolled when I was growing up. And my grandfather came out to the stoop and he was like, look into her eyes and know her hurt. And once you have looked into it long enough, you're going to know what to say and how to make this right and how to own it. And throughout my life, that has been a guiding principle. Whether I'm anticipating something with an enemy, whenever I'm defending my child for their legal rights and I'm dealing with angry school boards, whenever I was a minister and I was sticking up for a kid that was being bullied and we took it to the courts, or a victim of domestic violence, I always looked at my opponent's eyes because I wanted to anticipate where their emotions were, where their mindset was, what was going to happen next. In my relationships, if I've hurt someone, I look into their eyes because I want to know what they're feeling and I want to know what mess I made. And when they say I love you, I want to look into their eyes and see that. When my child and I have a moment, and I can actually remember a significant one. It was shortly after my ex-wife and I separated. I was no longer there to tuck them in every day. I was no longer there to be there to make breakfast and all these things. And there was a strain on the relationship. And I got tickets to go to a Bon Jovi concert. And they didn't really want to go to it. They weren't all that excited about it. But while we were there, when Bon Jovi was doing their almighty anthem of Living on a Prayer, I hear this singing to my left, and there's my too cool for school kid belting out the lyrics. And we looked at each other and we made eye contact, and that was the first time that it felt like, you know what, things are going to be okay.
Right.
Things are going to be great. We're connected. We've got this. Because it was more than just having fun at the concert. It was us having that fun. So, and in my photography, I know I've captured a moment when I've got the eye contact, whether that's street photography or whether I'm doing a project in studio. That eye contact is profound. So the best advice I ever got was look into their eyes, because it's going to tell you so much.
Now that's interesting. Has that ever acted as a way to signal danger? As a way that you saw something in someone's eyes that it kind of alerted you to something that you may not have picked up on?
Oh God, when I was a taxi driver, when I was a taxi driver, you had a couple seconds to get a read on somebody before you let them into your car about whether or not they were going to be trouble. Yeah. And if you had that vibe, that was always in the eyes. And a couple of times, because your cash register on wheels, people tried to rob me. And other times you just had violent drunks that got out of control. Or for whatever reason, you had to kick somebody out. And there was a moment where you knew that it was going to get violent. And you had a moment to decide whether this was going to be a fight or a flight moment. Yeah. But that look was never wrong. Another time, we're getting ready for my kid's senior prom. Now, my child's assigned birth was female, but they are transmasculine, but sometimes that expresses itself as fluid. Mm-hmm. But, so for prom, for senior prom, it was going to be a suit and a tie. And so we're in Kohl's, and the first shirt that we tried on kind of had this Leica thing going on, and you could see the biology.
Yeah.
And so we were like, oh no, we're going to try on a different shirt. We're going to pick out something different. But there was this guy who was there at the Kohl's by the dressing room who noticed this. And then he just had this steely-eyed glare. Now, my kid was completely oblivious of it while we were looking for a new shirt. My kid goes into the dressing room, and I actually wrote about this in the Patheos blog. You could see something change in this guy's face while my kid was in the dressing room, putting on a new shirt and putting on a new suit and getting ready to come out. And there's all these other parents there for the same reason, prom outfits. Mm-hmm. And he started to walk towards the dressing room, and I walked in front of him, and I was like, you have no purpose to go in there. Walk away.
Yeah.
Because I saw that moment of snap, and this was about to become a horror story.
Yeah.
So yeah, that looking at the eyes.
Now, did you have to say something, or did you just have to position yourself in space to send a message?
In this case, I said something because he was actually ready. He was starting to advance. At the point that I recognized what was about to go down in his eyes, he already started walking. Yeah. And just as a nice, I'm talking about inhumanity here. As we were getting ready to leave, this woman gave us like $40 of her Kohl's cash. Because she saw the whole exchange and just felt that it sucked. And she's like, while we're at the register, she's like, here's some Kohl's cash.
Oh, wow.
Have a great time. And I'm just like, oh my God, people are great.
That's great.
They don't all suck. Obviously, in stand-up comedy, as I've been getting myself comfortable in open mic, I have found picking a couple faces in the audience will help you with your timing and also help you understand whether or not you're connecting and engaging. And that's good. Sales whenever I'm working, but most importantly, how it's being used right now is I'm shelter in place. I have no girlfriend. My kid lives 50 miles away, and I've got a dog that's sleeping right now, and all I can see is his tail. But when I'm out there doing street photography, that's my connection with other people.
Yeah.
So I get to look at their eyes, and I get that moment of connection, and I live for that. We don't have a conversation. We're 10 feet apart, but we have that moment.
It's I imagine it's looking at someone else's eyes and being situationally aware of what's going on. It's difficult to learn that kind of awareness.
It is, but I think and this is actually something that I was realizing while I was having my dinner. It's actually something that I've become skilled at, and it's come from being aware of it. Because my grandfather was always telling me about a specific purpose, how to recognize the moment that they're about to catch a ball, how to recognize the moment that they're going to take a swing at you and where they're going to take that swing, how to recognize that moment when the pitcher is going to throw the ball to the batter, or whether he's going to throw it to the second baseman whenever I try to go for the steal. There's always a purpose behind the look. So without knowing it, without being cognizant of it, I've actually been using that skill for years. And I have to tell you that it's been especially refreshing in relationships. Because in relationships, there's going to be times where things are not always okay. And like my friend told me, that's okay that it's not okay. And even if the person doesn't say it, you know it's there.
Yeah.
And you can adjust and pivot how you behave while that's going on. Conversely, there's that moment where you know that you're connected at like a concert, or like a really good night, or that first time you look at somebody and you say, I love you, and they're not scared of it and they love you too.
Right. Yeah. Now you were talking about your kid just a little while ago. Have you communicated that, or have you tried to give examples, try to shepherd your child into being aware like that?
No. And I really hope that if they're watching that they don't get mad at me for this, but my child has a little bit of social anxiety, and there's nothing wrong with that. And eye contact and conversation, similar to what many people who are on the autism spectrum or other people who have social anxiety, eye contact is always difficult. And I adjust my conversations so that we're not making that eye contact. Do I give life advice? Yes. Do I give that one? No, because that wouldn't serve them.
That's a bit of sliced magic right there. Understanding what the other person, that's a level of abstracted thought that a lot of people don't have, because they just assume that the advice that I have is worth giving to everybody around me, when in all reality, that's not necessarily true.
Well, we get hung up on normative behavior, and we also get hung up on linear paths. What works for me is not necessarily going to work for you. I mean, I have people that they hear me talk openly about my mental health struggles and my anxiety, and I talk about my coping mechanisms and my toolbox and so on and so forth. And people are like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. But here's a couple things that I do. I don't know if they're going to work for you. I mean, I remember when I sat down in front of my therapist, and my therapist said, well, what hobbies do you have? What are your interests? And because I had spent so much time being a codependent and serving other people, my church, my this, my that, I was a blank page at that point.
Yeah.
So I just stared at her. And the next session, she gave me a printed list of 100 different hobbies. And I'm just like, and I'm looking at them, I'm like, oh, wow, I used to be very passionate about photography. I used to make money doing that.
Yeah.
I need to pick up my camera again. And it became obvious. But, photography is one of my greatest coping mechanisms. Deep breaths is one of my coping mechanisms. Music therapy, aromatherapy. Sometimes, God, thank goodness for people on the spectrum, because I've learned stimming works when you're stressed.
Say that again.
Stimming works when you're stressed.
What does that mean?
That's you're seeking stimulus. So if you see somebody rocking back and forth on the chair, or they're rocking their knee, it's called stimming.
So that is basically some kind of self-soothing behavior.
Yeah.
And
if it works, it works. But the advice that I give people, I can give them, well, this is what works for me.
Yeah.
But there's so many other things out there. You're going to have to find that thing that is going to get you through that moment.
Yeah. Nietzsche had this quote that Nietzsche said this thing about I have the key for you doesn't mean that I have the key for me, or that I have the key for me doesn't mean that I have the key for you. So you're right. What works for one person isn't going to necessarily work for the other person. That's definitely true.
My dad, with his advice, and it was funny. One of the top 10 lists, as I talk about my dad, his little advice about, that's great. Now let's find out why this bad news is great. That works for him. It just never worked for me. But I also, and this one came recently when I was struggling as an artist, because I'm like, yeah, I'm a photographer, but maybe I'm not the same photographer my father was when he was alive. I'm a writer. He was a writer too. Da 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 da. And an ex-girlfriend who I'm still friends with, Carrie, just said to me one day while we're talking on the phone, she's like, you really need to step out of your father's shadow.
Yeah.
So, while I think about his advice, I think about her advice. Now, that was great advice for me. It actually was helpful in that moment. But I can't look at you and say, dude, you gotta get out from under your dad's shadow. I don't know if that'll work.
Right.
You may not have that issue.
Right. Yeah. Totally. It's interesting about how do you help, or how do you shepherd people into finding meaning and finding what they've, because it's I don't want to sound trite, but it is a journey, and it's something that the person has to do the heavy work on their own. There could be assistance, there could be advice, but ultimately, we all have to do the heavy lifting for ourselves.
Well, that was a very interesting road when the dynamic of my relationship with my child changed and they came out. Because a lot of the advice that I was giving was based on my own experiences. A lot of the advice that I was giving was knowing where I was at in that life stage.
Yeah.
But then there came a point of identification that I have no idea what this is like. I have no idea what it is to have who I am talked about as an issue on the news, talked about in politics, talked about by religious authorities, talked about by school districts, talked about by everybody. And there's a level of acceptance or non-acceptance. Nobody has ever seen me dressed up in a leather jacket and a t-shirt or a suit and a tie and said, I don't like that. Nobody has ever done that. Nobody has wanted to charge me going to the bathroom. Nobody has, there is so much that I don't understand about this experience. So there comes a point where I can be present and I can encourage, and there's limited advice that I can give, but I also have to couch that knowing that I don't know certain things. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a role. As a dad, my primary role is to love unconditionally. As a father, my primary role is to be present when they need me. And I love those moments now that they're in college where every once in a while I'll get a call saying, hey, Dad, I'm going through this right now. And it's like, oh, I have a role. I mean, I'm present for what's going on, but there is this selfish part of me inside that's like, I get to be dad again.
Right.
And I love that. And as far as the advice, I'm very careful because I want them to figure out the best path.
Right.
And I don't definitively know what that is, especially whenever we're talking about things about love. I mean, I was divorced after 16 years. My last relationship ended, and neither one of us really wanted it to end, but it ended nonetheless. And so who am I to talk about relationships? Who am I to talk about compassion? I'm not always compassionate. Sometimes I'm a jagoff. The things that make me mad most on social media are the things that I find myself guilty of. The two biggest things that I've seen lately is I've seen a couple people say that so-and-so is ugly. And I'm just like, no. You don't get to call somebody ugly because of their facial features or their body type or whatever. No, you don't get to do that. That in and of itself is ugly, not a person.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is stupid. No, making a mistake is not stupidity. That's learning and growing. That's part of the human experience.
Yeah.
If not for my failures, I would never have learned a damn thing. I mean, Yoda in the second of that last abysmal trilogy, telling Luke that mistakes are our greatest teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true. So I can't call that stupid because there's something to learn. But the thing is, when those people are saying those things, there's a part of me that's holding up a mirror to myself and saying, you've called people ugly. You've done that. And maybe if I were to give advice, I would say, check yourself. Look into your own eyes and look in the mirror.
Yeah. It is definitely tough to do, especially on social media, because, I'm going to say the thing that everyone says. It's easy to be not compassionate on social media when you don't see the other person face to face. It's too easy to hit send. It's too easy to hit, to write something that you would never say to the other person if you were even just doing this, right? Just face to face.
A good friend of mine, Jeremy Rich, calls it keyboard courage.
Yeah.
And so many people have keyboard courage, and they've let go of civility. Now, in my opinion, there's a time where civil discourse is done. If you're talking of, my child is not an abject issue. Black Lives Mattering is not when we're talking about civil rights, human worth, when we're talking about rape culture, there are some things that I'm not going to have a civil discourse on. I hear a lot of white people sit there and say, hey, I miss the times of civil discourse. I'm like, you know what? That time actually didn't exist for the people that we talked about. That was a privilege that we had. Yeah.
That's that's interesting when you say that to people. It's like, well, that was a symptom of the privilege, of your privilege.
Right. I'm not going to have a civil discourse with you about domestic violence, sexual molestation, so on and so forth. And when I get mad, I'm going to listen to my grandfather again and look into my eyes.
Yeah.
Ooh, shit's getting deep.
There you go. Well, Pat, this has been great. I got something out of it, and looking into the other person's eyes. It's interesting that as many aspects of who I am in the world, it came from a fear-based kind of experience of growing up in a hard place of being situationally aware. But I appreciate that story, the series of stories that you told, and I hope that anyone who's going to be watching this now and in the future gets some value out of that.
I hope so too. Being on your show is fun. The highlight of my podcast and big cast experience used to be the only person on Religion for Life who got bleeped out. But, you say BJ on one radio show that's Christian based and they beep you. I don't know.
Well, there you go.
On that note, I'm going to put on my glasses now. I kept my glasses off so that way the glare would not prevent people from being able to see my eyes as I talked about this thing. Look at me.
Right. Well,
Andy, it's always fun. And seriously, I enjoy being on, and I enjoy watching the show, and everybody should watch the show, and everybody should read Laughing in Disbelief.
Why, thank you very much. Where can people find you online?
Online, well, there's Pat LaFord Green on Instagram. My Facebook is pretty locked down and useless. So about the only other place you can find me is feel free to go to patgreenphoto.com and hit the contact me or let's discuss or whatever I called it on the website, and we can get to know each other. Even if you're not there to buy anything, I don't care. Let's just BS. So, but yeah, Pat LaFord Green on Insta is probably the best place to get a hold of me.
And once again, I know that you're working on a book that should be coming out relatively soon.
Yes, real quick plug for it. It's still untitled, but it's two books. One is going to be a traditional photo book, and the other one is going to be a graphic novel interpretation. And it's basically going to be the expectations that those who live with mental health conditions have to face, and we visually represent that, and then who they really are when no one's looking, who they really are when they are at peace, and what they wish everybody could be comfortable seeing. Because that's how we normalize therapy, is when we stop having perfect smiles and perfect portraits.
True enough. True enough. Thanks for coming on The Best Advice Ever. This has been great.
Thank you. I hope it's probably not the best advice ever, but it was damn good advice and fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching.